After our last hearing, President Trump tried to call a witness in our investigation, a witness you have not yet seen in these hearings. That person declined to answer or respond to President Trump's call and instead alerted their lawyer to the call. Their lawyer alerted us, and this committee has supplied that information to the Department of Justice. Let me say one more time, we will take any effort to influence witness testimony very seriously.
Okay, and we don't know if he was trying to influence anybody, but there you go. The January 6th committee continues to make the case for criminal charges against President Trump, but the harder they hit him, the more it helps non-Trumpy Republicans. Less than half of Republicans now support President Trump in a primary. New York Times poll shows Trump at 49%, with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis at 25%, someone else 26%. A clear majority of primary voters under 35 years old, 64%, as well as 65% of those with at least a college degree, a leading indicator of political preferences inside the donor class, told pollsters they would vote against Mr. Trump in a presidential primary. Vince Colonnese is here, host of the Vince Colonnese Show, heard around Washington, D.C., and editorial director of the Daily Caller. Good to see you, my friend. Get to the politics of this in a second. It seems as though the January 6th committee is trying really hard to get Trump on something, anything criminal. The closest they're trying to get so far is witness tampering. Am I reading that right?
I mean, it is, honestly, it's pathetic, Leland. I think that the media has done far too much to dignify these proceedings. And the reason I say that is because if you are a journalist, I know you are, that has a sense of how you gather facts, the way you do that is to corroborate evidence and then prove things to be true. And instead, what we've gotten from this committee is countless hours of depositions that the public can't see. They only show you a couple seconds at a time of any given deposition. And no cross-examination whatsoever. Witnesses who make claims on the basis of hearsay, I'm thinking of Cassidy Hutchinson, alleging that people like Pat Cipollone said everyone's going to be charged with all sorts of crimes. And then when they talk to Pat Cipollone, they don't corroborate anything. They ask him questions. They don't ask him anything about that scandalous allegation from Cassidy Hutchinson. And Zoe Lofgren was on CNN this past weekend. She was asked about that by Jake Tapper, and she said, well, we don't call any witnesses to corroborate something another witness says. I'm sorry, what? If it's a fact-finding operation, your job is to take an allegation and check it with the primary sources. They're not doing that, Leland. This is cartoonishly evil, what's being conducted here. It's not a real fact-finding operation, and that's a disappointment because facts are obviously the kind of things we need.
We do need them. Is it, though, having an effect that at least a lot of non-Trumpy Republicans are pretty happy with? There's a number that I talked to who were saying, like, look, the January 6th committee is managing to do what the entire 2016 field of Republican candidates couldn't do, which was chip away at Donald Trump's support.
Right. Well, and there's also not officially in any sense yet a 2024 field, although, again, it's shaping up. We know the people that are likely to do it. I think what's interesting in the numbers that you cited is, one, that's true. First of all, I think that demonstrates the diversity of opinions among Republicans rather than the notion that there's somehow a strict cult of personality around any one person. But the other component to that is that there is still a plurality of support among Donald Trump, and especially among people who are not, don't have college degrees. I think that is a very important thing to pay attention to. So if you are a Republican candidate, Donald Trump or otherwise, your obligation is to speak to the needs of those people, because that's how you will get elected as the nominee and then likely as the president of the United States. Here's where Democrats are screwing up. They're goading Trump into doing this. So if they don't want Trump, if they really believe that he's the existential threat should he get another term, they are doing everything that you would do to encourage Trump to run again. That's what they're doing with this process.
Or, double blindfolded underwater chess is they're actually trying to get him to run because they think they can beat him.
It's possible, but when he ran against Joe Biden had not yet been president of the United States and overseen a plummeting economy. And now you have that. Now you have inflation out of control. Now you have gas prices out of control. That was as heated as an election as you and I have ever seen 2020. We go into 2024, Biden with a record.
I'm with you on that. If President Trump would make it about the economy in all of his rallies and this issue that people care about. 29% of Americans say the economy is the most important thing to deal with. Election integrity is at 3%, yet here is a brief montage of President Trump at his recent rallies.
We need a landslide so big that they cannot rig it or steal it.
Why aren't they investigating massive election fraud and irregularities instead of investigating the people who want to get to the bottom of a rigged and stolen election?
They say we lost. Don't believe it.
They cheat in the elections, and they cheat now like never before.
They're against voter ID. Who's against voter ID? There's only one reason you can be against voter ID, because you want to cheat. There's no other reason.
At least privately, a number of even Trump supporters I talked to keep going like this. Like, why will he just not move on and talk about the economy?
Well, the secure election components is fine and non-objectionable, I think, in every sense. Passing voter ID laws, good to go. Yeah. But here's what he has to do, though. He has to remember why he won in the first place. When he won in 2016, he won on secure borders. He won on taking it to China. He won on fighting for the working class. So it is absolutely essential that he recall those issues, because those are the issues that brought voters out for him. And if he wants to run again, that's the way he wins. He's got to speak to the actual needs of his voters. And since his presidency, things like, the January 6th detainees, people who have been held in prison in D.C., Trump's spoken a lot about his own plight, but not as much about theirs. No. And I think it's important to speak up for people like that. And not to mention when parents are saying that their school boards are out of control.
No. It's all the issues you and I've talked about and that normal people talk about. Hey, Vince, we got to run. Thank you.
Amen. See you, Leland.
Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.